Marriage is a beautiful lie you tell yourself every morning while brushing your teeth. I, Wesley Grant, had been telling myself that lie for 11 years, standing in our master bathroom in our $1.4 million River Oaks townhouse, looking at a man in the mirror who had convinced himself that a quiet wife meant a content wife. That distance meant maturity, that a woman who stopped asking how your day went had simply evolved past small talk. God, I was stupid. Welcome back to Dad's True Revenge. Grab your snacks, get comfortable, and remember, the people in these stories had every chance to behave themselves. They just chose wrong. Drop a comment and be sure to subscribe. You're going to love it here. But today started like every other day. Coffee, traffic on Westheimer Road, a client call that could have been an email. I worked in commercial real estate, the kind of job that sounds impressive at dinner parties, but mostly means you spend your life on the phone arguing about square footage with men who own more shoes than sense. My office was downtown, 12 floors up, with a window that looked out over a city that never stopped moving. Houston doesn't pause. It just swallows you and keeps going. I didn't plan to visit Mariah's office that morning. That's the part that still gets me. My wife, Dr. Mariah Grant, ran one of the most well-regarded behavioral therapy practices in the Houston Medical Center District, the Renewed Mind Wellness Group. Sleek waiting rooms, soft lighting, a receptionist named Nobody I Cared About, who always smiled like she was hiding something. Mariah was brilliant, the kind of brilliant that made you feel lucky to be near it, and slightly stupid by comparison. She had written 2 books, been featured in Texas Monthly, and gave keynote speeches at charity galas for a nonprofit she'd founded herself. The Brighter Futures Foundation helped underprivileged children, or so everybody thought. I stopped by because I'd made a reservation at Caracol, her favorite seafood restaurant on Post Oak Boulevard, for our anniversary dinner that Saturday. I wanted to confirm she was free Thursday to pick up the dress she'd ordered. That's it. A 30-second conversation. I was going to kiss her on the cheek and be back in my car before noon. I didn't know that 30 seconds would detonate 11 years of my life. The medical center district was its usual controlled chaos. When I parked the Tahoe on Burtner Avenue and walked the half-block to her building, glass and steel, the kind of architecture that whispers, "We charge $400 an hour in here." The receptionist, Belle, 20-some, always with the headset, looked up when I pushed through the door, and her smile did something strange, flickered like a light bulb deciding whether it wanted to commit. "Mr. Grant." She straightened. "Dr. Grant isn't expecting you." "I know," I said. "Surprise visit." Married people do that sometimes. She's in a session right now. A long one. It could be. She glanced at her screen. Another 40 minutes minimum. I shrugged. I'll wait at her desk. I know the way. Actually, I should probably Belle. I smiled. I've been here 100 times. She went quiet. That flicker again. I filed it away without knowing why. Mariah's private office sat at the end of a short hallway, past 2 therapy rooms and a small kitchen that always smelled like chamomile and ambition. I opened her door, stepped inside, and exhaled. The room smelled like her. Bergamot and something warm underneath it. Framed degrees on the walls. A mahogany desk so polished you could do surgery on it. Bookshelves that lined the entire left wall. Color-coded because of course they were. The woman color-coded groceries. I settled into the chair across from her desk, the one her patients probably used to confess their worst secrets, and I pulled out my phone to scroll mindlessly while I waited. That's when I saw it on the desk, just sitting there between a legal pad and a stack of folders. A fountain pen, dark burgundy barrel, gold trim, the kind of thing that costs more than most people's car payments. I wouldn't have thought twice about it. Mariah collected nice pens, except for the engraving. I leaned forward. Belle Grant, my daughter's name. My hands moved before my brain gave permission. I picked it up. It was heavier than expected. Solid, substantial, the weight of something that mattered. Belle Grant, our daughter, 12 years old, missing for 8 months. 8 months of police reports that went nowhere. 8 months of flyers on telephone poles along Shepherd Drive in Westheimer. 8 months of a grief that had settled into my bones like concrete. 8 months of sleeping next to a woman who cried at the candlelight vigils and gave television interviews and squeezed my hand in front of cameras and whispered, "We'll find her, Wes. I know we will." 8 months of that woman keeping our daughter's fountain pen on her desk like a paperweight. Something in my chest went very, very cold. I turned the pen over in my fingers. My thumb found a small seam near the clip, almost invisible, the kind of thing you'd never notice unless your hands were already shaking and looking for something to hold on to. I pressed it, a soft click, and the bookshelf moved. Not dramatically, not like the movies where stone grinds and dust falls from the ceiling. It just slid, smooth and hydraulic, like it had been built by someone who knew exactly what they were doing. A 4-foot gap opened between the edge of the shelf and the wall, and cool air breathed out of the darkness beyond it. I stood up so fast the chair rolled back and hit the desk. "Belle?" My voice came out barely above a whisper, then louder. "Belle? Daddy?" Small, hoarse, like a voice that hadn't been used for regular conversation in a very long time. She was sitting on a twin bed against the far wall of a room no bigger than a walk-in closet. White walls. LED strip lighting on a dim setting. A small bookshelf with textbooks. A desk with a laptop. And my daughter, my 12-year-old daughter, who I had not seen in 8 months, thin in a way that made my throat close, wearing clothes I didn't recognize, looking at me with eyes that had learned to be careful. This is the part where a good father rushes in and scoops her up, and I did. But this is also the part where something else was born in me. Something I didn't have a name for yet. Something that wasn't grief or relief. Something else. I crossed the room in 2 steps and pulled her into my chest, and she went rigid for a half second, rigid like a child who'd forgotten what safe felt like before she crumbled into me and started to shake. "I've got you, baby. I've got you." She said you didn't want me anymore. Her voice was muffled against my shirt. She said I was. She said I was too much. That you both agreed. My jaw tightened. That's a lie. My voice was so controlled it scared me. "That is the biggest lie anyone has ever told you." "I know," she whispered. "I think I always knew." But she kept saying it, and I pulled back and looked at her face, memorized it, every new hollow, every new shadow. "How long have you been in here?" "Since September, I think. At first, she let me out at night. Then she stopped. September. It was now May. Does anyone else know you're here?" She shook her head, then hesitated. "Preston brings my food sometimes." Preston, my wife's younger brother, whom I had sat across from at Thanksgiving, who had hugged me at a candlelight vigil and said, "Brother, we're going to find her." Who had looked me in my eyes. I felt the cold thing in my chest spread outward like a stain. "Okay." I kept my voice even, steady. The voice I used in negotiations when I was about to take everything off the table. "Here's what we're going to do. You're going to come with me right now, and you're not going to say a word to anyone until I tell you it's safe. Can you do that?" Belle nodded. Good girl. She always was. I walked her out through the office, past the bookshelf that I pulled back into place behind us. Let Mariah come back and find everything exactly as she left it. And down the hallway. Belle kept her head down. When we passed the reception desk, Belle looked up at the receptionist who had tried to stall me at the door. "Hi, Belle," the receptionist said carefully. "The way you speak to a situation you've decided not to see." She knew. I looked at her long enough to make sure she understood that I understood. Her face went the color of copy paper. "Have a good afternoon," I said pleasantly. I put my daughter in the passenger seat of my Tahoe on Bertner Avenue at 12:19 p.m. on a Tuesday in May, and I drove north on Main Street toward our townhouse in River Oaks without calling the police, without calling anyone. I needed to think. I didn't know yet that Belle wasn't the only child. I didn't know yet about the girl being flown in from overseas. I didn't know yet exactly how wide my wife's operation ran, or how many people she had convinced to look the other way. But I was about to find out, and when I did, I wasn't going to make a single move that I hadn't already planned. 3 steps ahead. Mariah had spent 11 years studying how broken people think. It was time she met one. Most men, when their world collapses, reach for a bottle. I reached for a legal pad and a black marker. Revenge without a blueprint is just anger with bad aim. Belle was upstairs, showered, fed 3 scrambled eggs and toast because it was the first thing I could make without my hands shaking too badly, and asleep in her old bedroom for the first time in 8 months. I stood in the doorway for a full minute just watching her chest rise and fall, making sure. The way you check on a newborn, because you don't yet trust the universe to keep them breathing without a witness. Then I went downstairs, sat at the kitchen island, and started making a list of everything I knew about my wife, which, as it turned out, was embarrassingly little. I knew she took her coffee black. I knew she hated the sound of televisions in restaurants. I knew she could walk into a room full of strangers, and within 20 minutes have every single one of them convinced she was the most empathetic person they'd ever met. That last part, the part I used to think was a gift, I now understood was a skill, practiced, deliberate. The difference between a warm fireplace and a controlled burn. I wrote her name at the top of the page, Mariah Grant. Then I drew a line underneath it and started mapping everything she'd built. The Brighter Futures Foundation had been Mariah's idea 3 years into our marriage. I thought it was beautiful. This woman I loved, pouring herself into underprivileged children, creating pathways, building futures. I'd written the first check myself, $50,000, proud as a man can be. I'd told people at dinner parties, my wife, she runs this incredible foundation. I'd worn her accomplishments like a boutonniere and never once thought to ask who was actually managing the money. $50,000. I put that on the list, too. Under a column I labeled, What I Funded. My phone buzzed. Mariah, running behind. Session went long. Won't be home until 7. Don't wait on dinner. Love you. I stared at the message for a long time. She doesn't know I was there. She doesn't know I have Belle. She thinks the room is still sealed and the secret is still breathing. I typed back, no problem, I'll grab something. Love you too. And I meant that last part, the way you mean a door slamming with finality and a sound that echoes. I spent the next 4 hours on my laptop. What I found in those 4 hours would have broken a lesser man or a smarter one. I'm still not sure which category I fall into. The kind that gets destroyed by the truth, or the kind that gets focused by it. The Brighter Futures Foundation was registered as a 501c3 nonprofit in the state of Texas. Clean paperwork, beautiful website with stock photos of smiling children, and a donation portal that had processed. I found this in a cash tax document from a nonprofit watchdog site just over $2.3 million in the past 4 years. The board of directors listed 3 names. Mariah, an attorney I'd met once at a gala named No One Who Mattered, and Preston Adair. Preston, my wife's brother, whose last name I had never once thought to Google. I Googled it now. Preston Adair had a consulting firm registered in Delaware. The firm had no website, no employees listed, and a registered address that, when I mapped it, was a UPS store on the outskirts of Wilmington. He was also listed as a co-signatory on a bank account attached to a subsidiary of the foundation, a program called Pathways International. International. I leaned back in my chair. How many children, Mariah? I didn't have that answer yet, but I knew one thing. The room behind that bookshelf wasn't built for a long-term prison. It was too clean, too organized. Textbooks, a laptop which I had brought home and now sat on the kitchen island next to my legal pad. The laptop was password protected, but I knew Mariah's patterns. She used variations of the same base password for everything. I'd watched her log into her personal email enough times to have it memorized without meaning to. I tried the first variation. Nothing. Second, nothing. Third, I added Belle's birth year to the end. The laptop opened. Of course it did. She kept our daughter's name on a pen like a trophy and used her birthday as a password. The arrogance of a woman who never expected to be caught. The files on that laptop rewrote everything I thought I knew. Mariah had a folder labeled, I kid you not, Futures, that contained intake documents. Children, 8 of them over 4 years from 3 different countries, Philippines, Guatemala, Ukraine. Each file had a photograph, a name, an age, a psychological assessment written in Mariah's precise clinical language, and a column she called Integration Timeline. Integration, like these were software updates. Like these were patches for lives she decided needed replacing. My stomach turned, then steadied. Steady, Wes. Each child had been brought into the country through what appeared to be legitimate humanitarian visa channels, the kind that required a licensed clinician to sign off on psychological necessity. Mariah was a licensed clinician. She had signed every single document herself. The children were placed with host families, a term she used in the files, families who believed they were participating in a cultural exchange program run by the foundation. But the last file stopped me cold. It was newer than the others, created 4 months ago. The photograph showed a girl who looked, in bone structure and coloring, startlingly similar to my daughter, 12 years old, from Manila. Her name on the intake form was Lena Reyes. Beneath the photograph, in Mariah's handwriting because she'd printed this one and scanned it, the only one she'd done that way, which told me it was special, were 4 words: candidate for primary placement. Primary placement. I sat with that for a long time. My wife had not just hidden our daughter. She had been auditioning a replacement, a child who looked enough like Belle to eventually be presented to the world, to our friends, to our family, to the Houston social circles that Mariah curated like a museum exhibit as a rescued child she had brought home. Given a new name, a new story, while our actual daughter was quietly erased, renamed, redistributed into the system as someone else's charity case. She was going to replace our child, and I had been sitting at dinner parties bragging about her foundation. I closed the laptop very carefully, stood up, walked to the kitchen sink, turned on the cold water, and put both hands under it and just breathed. Don't move too fast. Don't call the police yet. If you call the police right now, Preston runs. The host families scatter, the kids disappear back into the system, and nobody answers for any of it. Mariah hires the best attorney in Texas and walks in 3 years on procedural grounds. No, this has to be surgical. I dried my hands, went back to the island, opened the legal pad to a clean page, and wrote 2 words at the top. Grant Holloway. My oldest friend, 12 years at the FBI's Houston field office. Currently running financial crimes investigations out of the downtown federal building on Rusk Street. The man who had stood next to me at my wedding, who had slow danced with Mariah's college roommate and called me the next morning mortified because he'd stepped on her feet twice, who had sat with me in this very kitchen 3 months after Belle disappeared and told me quietly, professionally, with the weight of a man who knew too much about how these cases ended, that the statistics after 90 days were not in our favor. He didn't know his statistics were being managed. I wasn't going to call Grant yet. I needed more. I needed everything documented and airtight before I handed it to anyone with a badge. Because the moment I did, the story became theirs to tell, and I had something more important than justice in mind. I wanted Mariah's name to mean something specific in this city. I wanted every person who had ever applauded at her galas to feel the retroactive embarrassment of it in their bones. I wanted the story to be so complete, so thoroughly documented, that no attorney, no spin doctor, no tearful press conference could sand a single edge off it. Justice would come, but reputation death comes first. I heard small footsteps on the stairs at 4:30 p.m. Belle appeared in the kitchen doorway, hair loose, wearing the oversized University of Houston sweatshirt she'd apparently still had hanging in her closet. She looked at the legal pad, at the laptop, at the expression on my face that I hadn't quite managed to neutralize before she walked in. "You're planning something," she said. "I'm just working, Dad." She tilted her head. She had her mother's eyes, which was currently a complicated thing to reckon with. "I know your work face. That's not it." I patted the bar stool next to me. She climbed up, tucked her feet under herself the way she always had since she was 4 years old, and looked at the legal pad without touching it. "She was going to bring someone else home," Belle said quietly, like it wasn't a question. I looked at her. "What do you know about that?" I heard her on the phone through the wall. She paused. She was talking to Uncle Preston. She said the transition needed to happen before the fall gala, that it had to be clean. Belle's voice didn't crack, which was somehow worse than if it had. She said my name, and then she said former. Former? My own daughter referred to as a past tense. "How long have you known?" I asked. "Maybe 2 months. She shrugged, small, tired. I stopped crying about it after the first week. It didn't seem useful. 12 years old. I had raised, apparently, a person significantly tougher than me. "She's not going to get away with it," I said. "I know. Brielle looked at me steadily. But Dad, don't just arrest her. Make it mean something, she said. I looked at my daughter, thin, careful-eyed, 8 months hardened, and I felt something shift in my chest. Not the cold surgical thing, something older. Pride. That, I said, picking up the black marker, is exactly the plan. At 6:58 p.m., 2 minutes before Mariah's key hit the front door lock, I was sitting on the couch with a glass of water and the television on, looking for all the world like a man who'd had a perfectly ordinary Tuesday. Belle was back upstairs, asleep or pretending. We'd agreed she was a ghost until I said otherwise. I heard the door open, heels on hardwood, the specific sound of my wife moving through a house she believed was still hers. Hey, I smiled. How was the long session? Exhausting. She rolled her neck, walked to the kitchen, opened the fridge. Completely normal, completely comfortable. A woman with no idea her empire had a crack in the foundation. Did you eat? I had something good. She pulled out a sparkling water, leaned against the counter, looked at me with those eyes that had once made me feel like the most seen man in the world. You okay? You look a little. She sipped her water, glanced toward the hallway just briefly. Just a flicker in the direction of the guest room, where the hidden door was not, because that door was 20 minutes away on Burtner Avenue, and whatever she was checking on, it wasn't here. She had no idea. I watched her walk upstairs to change, and I thought about 8 children in 3 countries, and a girl named Lena Reyes with a photograph in a scanned file and a column called Integration Timeline. And I thought about a pen engraved with my daughter's name sitting on a desk like a souvenir. And I smiled. Not yet, Mariah. But I promise you soon. Some men forgive. Some men forget. I am not some men. 30 days. That's how long I spent being the perfect husband. Kissing Mariah's cheek every morning, asking about her sessions, sitting across from her at dinner in our River Oaks dining room, cutting my steak, nodding at her words, while underneath the table, my left hand rested on a phone loaded with enough documented evidence to dismantle everything she'd spent a decade constructing. 30 days of the best acting of my life. Belle stayed at my brother-in-law's place in Katy, someone Mariah had no connection to, under strict instructions to exist nowhere near social media. I told Mariah that I needed space to process the grief of the anniversary of Belle's disappearance. She held my hand. She cried real tears. We're gonna be okay, Wes, she whispered one night. Yeah, I said, squeezing back. We really are. Grant Holloway met me at 7 a.m. on a Wednesday at Common Bond Cafe on Westheimer, neutral territory, corner table, the kind of place where 2 men having coffee don't register as anything significant. I slid a flash drive across the table before he'd even opened his menu. He looked at it, then at me. Wesley, before you say anything I said, just look at it. He plugged it into his personal laptop right there. I watched his face change. Grant Holloway was 20 years in federal law enforcement. The man had a resting expression, carved from Houston concrete. But somewhere around minute 4, scrolling through Mariah's futures folder, something moved behind his eyes. He closed the laptop slowly. How long have you had this? 30 days. Wesley, you should have called me immediately. If I'd called you immediately, I said, sipping my coffee, Preston would have gotten a heads up. The host families would have scattered, and Mariah would have been in a Chanel blazer on the Channel 13 Evening News, talking about how her jealous husband fabricated everything. I set down my cup. I needed it airtight. It's airtight. 3 countries? I know. And the girl from Manila, Lena Reyes? She landed at Bush Intercontinental 6 days ago. She's currently with a host family in Sugarland. That was new information. I kept my face level. Then we're right on time. He picked up the flash drive, turned it over in his fingers. I'm going to need 48 hours to get warrants. You have them, I said. But Grant, I need one thing from you. He waited. The press release goes out before the arrest, not after. Before? I want every journalist in Houston to have her name in their mouth before she sees a single badge. Grant studied me with the look of a man negotiating with someone who has already decided. That's not standard procedure. No, I agreed, but neither is what she did. He pocketed the flash drive, stood up, threw 2 20s on the table. 48 hours, he said, and walked out into the Houston morning. I spent those 48 hours finishing what I'd started. Mariah's social world was a carefully curated architecture: the gala committees, the hospital board positions, the Texas Monthly Profile, the speaking circuit. I had mapped every single pillar, and I had spent 30 days quietly, anonymously contacting the right journalists. A features reporter at the Houston Chronicle, an investigative producer at KHOU 11, a nonprofit watchdog blogger with 40,000 followers, and a reputation for being extremely thorough. I didn't give them the story. I gave them the questions specific, surgical questions about the Brighter Futures Foundation that no innocent organization could answer cleanly. I let them dig. I let them find their own threads. By the time the warrants were signed, 4 separate journalists had already started pulling. Thursday morning, 6 a.m., I made Mariah her coffee, black, set it on the counter beside her, watched her check her phone with the unhurried ease of a woman whose Thursday had no surprises scheduled. Her phone buzzed, then again, then 4 times in rapid succession. She frowned at the screen. I already knew what she was reading. The Houston Chronicle had posted at 5:47 a.m. Questions surround River Oaks Therapists nonprofit. Children, visas, and missing money. KHOU had a crawler running on their morning broadcast. The watchdog blogger had published at midnight, and it had already been shared 1,100 times. Wes? Her voice was strange, compressed. I was buttering toast. There's something online about the foundation. It's someone saying. She looked up at me, and for the first time in 11 years, I watched my wife look at me and not see what she expected. Something in my stillness registered wrong to her. Wesley? I put down the butter knife. Preston's been arrested, I said quietly, about 4 minutes ago. Grant Holloway sends his regards. The coffee cup slipped in her hand. She caught it. The doorbell rang. 3 federal agents and 2 Houston PD officers. I had unlocked the front door before I came downstairs. I did not watch them handcuff her. I walked to the back porch and stood in the thin Houston morning light and listened to the sounds of her world ending. The voices, the radio chatter, the specific silence of a woman who was too smart to say anything without an attorney. Lena Reyes was recovered from the Sugarland host family that same morning. All 8 children were located within 72 hours. Every single one. The story was everywhere within 6 hours. By evening, the Brighter Futures Foundation was the most searched term in Houston. By the following Monday, it had gone national. Every gala photograph Mariah had ever taken was being republished with a different caption than the one she'd intended. She had wanted her name on buildings. She got it on federal indictments instead. I visited her once, 3 weeks after the arrest, at the Harris County Detention Center on Baker Street. She was already thinner, already smaller. The particular deflation of a person whose power was entirely borrowed from other people's belief in them. She sat across the glass and looked at me with eyes that had cycled through every emotion and landed finally on something cold and calculating. Even now, even here, you planned all of it, she said. Not a question. Every step. How long? Since the Tuesday I found that pen on your desk. I reached into my jacket pocket and set something against the glass. Her fountain pen? The dark burgundy one. The one engraved Belle Grant, except it wasn't engraved with Belle's name anymore. I had it re-engraved, Wesley Grant. She stared at it. That belongs to me. I said I paid for it. I paid for everything, actually. I stood up, straightened my jacket. 11 years, Mariah. The house, the practice, the foundation's first $50,000. I picked the pen back up, slid it into my pocket. Consider this a repossession. I walked to the door. Wesley! Her voice followed me. Controlled, precise, a scalpel. Even now, you won't be able to move on from this. You know that. You'll spend the rest of your Belle says hi, I said, and I let the door close behind me. She got 41 years. Preston got 22. All 8 children were reunited with their families or placed in verified protective care. Lena Reyes went home to Manila 4 months later. I know because I paid for the flight. The Houston Chronicle ran a follow-up piece 6 months after the arrest. They called me a hero. I'm not a hero. I'm just a father who found a pen. If you like this story, join our community by hitting that like button and subscribing for more real, raw, and family-centered stories.